What are the best shoes for a marathon? What's a goo? Why are my easy runs always in zone 5? If you're asking yourself these kinds of questions, you're probably embarking on your first marathon journey. Don't worry, I've been there. Hey, I'm Jack, an everyday runner hoping to help others learn a little bit more about running. In today's video, I'm going to reflect on what I wish I knew before running my first marathon. I'll split the video up into the following sections: before the marathon, during the marathon, and after the marathon. Let's get into it. I feel like this is where a lot of the thinking is done. The moment you've received the race confirmation that you'd be running your first marathon, right before you've even touched your training plan or even know what one you're going to be doing. I remember as soon as I found out I'd be running my first marathon, I began to research extensively, mainly on other people's journeys towards training for their first marathons and eventually running for them, seeing what I actually was getting myself into and what that would look like on a day-to-day basis. I mean, hey, I didn't even know what a tempo run was, what long distance running shoes would be like or even feel like, and hey, I'm even discovering these new things to this day. I mean, it was fun and all for me to be a bit curious as to what a marathon would look like, but it got to a point where it became an obsession and I started to research all the ins and outs when I know I couldn't have answered all of them. It got to a point where I became overwhelmed and had no idea if I'd actually be able to make it through, putting doubts in my mind instead of excitement and preparing for the challenge ahead. So here's what I wish I knew before I first started training for my marathon. The first is to trust in your program and your coach if you have one. I was fortunate enough to have a coach who would design my training programs for me based on my current experience level and fitness level. Looking back on it now, it saved me so much stress as to what training would look like in order to run my first marathon. So if you have the ability to, I would highly recommend investing in a coach, or even going to some of the running apps that have marathon training plans that you can even sync to your fitness watches. While I was able to tick off most of my sessions planned in my marathon training program, I only really started building up that confidence towards the final weeks of it. The running programs you see out there are designed to help build you up to running the marathon distance, so have trust and faith in them. I know it's easier said than done, but don't overthink it. The next is knowing what good pain is and what bad pain is. I only really started figuring this out halfway through my marathon training program, where a few niggles that would pop up so often would start to become worse as time went on, and no matter what strength training I did, found that they were still getting to a point where I couldn't run at my best capabilities. Towards the final parts of my marathon training, had many physio appointments just to get me through and to ensure my strength training was there to get me back up to running at full capacity too. So I had about a couple weeks or so where I had to taper down just a little bit before working my way back up. And especially at the start, I didn't realize that marathon trainings also came with experiencing these niggles and minor setbacks throughout it too. I originally went in with the thought that if I could tick off all the training sessions, then I wouldn't get injured or I wouldn't get sore, but in reality, no matter how trained or seasoned you are, you're still going to have some level of pain come up throughout your training program too. My first example of learning about bad pain in my marathon journey was actually after the first week. I was wearing a pair of black Vans and noticed that on the outer side of my foot, I started getting a really excruciating pain, almost to a point where I couldn't weight bear anymore. And after a yarn with the coach, booked in an appointment to see a podiatrist and found out that I had peroneal tendonitis, where my peroneal tendons had become inflamed as well. And I think it was going from literally 0 running a week to suddenly 20 Ks, which at that time was a huge jump for me. Next, I wish I knew more about how important rest and nutrition would be to a marathon training journey. As I got deeper into my training program, I noticed myself starting to get more tired throughout the work days and found it very difficult at times to get up for my next session the next morning, many times often pushing that session back to the afternoon or evening after I'd gotten home from work. But looking back at it now, it was literally due to insufficient sleep. I'd find myself still playing games on my computer here or scrolling through Instagram, only to realize that I really needed to get to bed at around 9:30 to ensure I got at least 7.5 hours of sleep to get up for my next training session. So if you're just getting started into your marathon journey or thinking about signing up for your first one, definitely schedule in consistent sleep hours throughout the week. It'll pay dividends for your training as well as your recovery for the next sessions. The same goes for nutrition. Obviously, starting to run more, your body's going to need more fuel to keep it running, and instead of reaching for chocolate, chips, soft drink, and all that stuff that really doesn't fuel your body right, really wish I looked towards more whole foods, more water, and even electrolytes to keep my body fueled and ready for the next session. And this is a current nutrition goal that I have for my Ballarat marathon training schedule, is to eat more foods that allow my body to recover better. Back when I wasn't doing much long running, I would often reach out to Powerades, and looking back at it, that wasn't beneficial because I really wasn't doing as much strenuous exercise as I am now to warrant me having all those Powerades. Whereas now that I'm running upwards of 50 kilometers a week, need that Powerade or electrolyte mix just to ensure my body is fueled and recovered, ready for when I get out for my next run, especially for the days before my long runs, knowing that my body and my system is topped up with all the essential nutrients to get me through it. The last thing that I wish I knew before starting my marathon journey was to use your long runs to mimic your marathon prep as well. So what I mean by that is even getting up around the time that you need to start preparing for your race, wearing the equipment that you'll be using for your marathon, as well as using and experimenting with the nutrition that'll fuel you on race day. Now, while I did experiment with my nutrition and what gear I'd wear, I felt like I didn't do too much investigating into refueling and hydrating throughout my long runs too, and really only experienced that when I got out there to run my marathon, seeing how much extra electrolytes my body needed to get me through. Your long runs are the perfect training ground to really start experimenting and trying to get as many factors as possible right before getting out there to the start line. A personal example from my own marathon journey was regarding hydration and fueling up with water. I would find myself in the initial parts of my training just sipping water casually as I needed it to, and often drinking a bit too much. Whereas as I got towards the final weeks of my training program and now understanding and seeing where aid stations would be put up in the New York Marathon, found myself drinking at every 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers to mimic where aid stations would be on the course too, to kind of get an idea as to when my body would be allowed to consume the water and electrolyte mixes available on the course. It also helped when I started consuming my gels as to knowing when exactly I'd be hitting an aid station to have a drink of water too, not going almost 2 kilometers or whatever before getting access to water out there on the course. Though if your marathon organizer allows it, wearing a hydration vest allows you to have access to water all throughout your marathon too. So something to consider there. All right, so you're now at that point where you're taking the bus or walking to the starting village and getting ready to head towards that starting line. For me, this is what I wish I knew before I started setting foot across that starting line into my first marathon. Firstly is to respect the distance. 42.195 kilometers is a heck of a long way. Now, for many training programs, you won't actually hit the 42 kilometer mark, and usually may have around 10 to 12 kilometers where you'll be entering the unknown and not knowing what to expect out of it. While my training program may have gotten me ready to endure the distance of a marathon, I actually didn't realize how much of a toll the marathon distance would take on my body. Which leads me into my next thing that I wish I knew, in that you're going to hurt, especially if it's your first marathon and you haven't had too much long distance running experience. You're gonna hurt somewhere along the 10K, 20K, or even as late as the 30K mark too, and you're gonna be in the pain cave for a little bit too. That's where I felt like mindset and having that mental toughness really caused me to drop off towards the 30 kilometer mark in my first marathon too. So if you have something like a mantra or just a positive way to keep going, that'll help you through those pain cave moments to get you through and pushing beyond. Your body is capable of much more than you think. Hold strong throughout it and through those moments of doubt. As I touched on just before, a mantra is a good way to keep yourself motivated and going through those tough times. For me, I did a 30 kilometer trial event, which essentially secured our spot into the New York Marathon through the Indigenous Marathon Project. I used the mantra SMILE in my 30 kilometer trial selection event. And this was a mantra that I'd picked up from Eliud Kipchoge, who would smile during those tough times when things were getting tough out there. Now, while I'm not an elite marathoner like him, felt that this was something so simple to apply to my running, and honestly wish that I had that same mantra going into the New York City Marathon, because I felt like that's what kept me together in my 30Ks to get me over the line, and I kind of just fell off in that final 12 kilometers of my marathon race. Even a simple mantra can keep you going, such as one foot after the other. Another thing I wish I knew was to not take anything and everything offered out there on the course. Now, I'm not talking about the aid stations where you can take water and electrolytes. I'm talking about the super amazing supporters offering lollies and other fizzy drinks to get you through. When I was in my final 12 kilometers, I was almost taking anything and everything people were offering out there. I remember having cups of salt, drinking cups of Coca-Cola, and just shoving a bunch of lollies in my mouth because at that point, I was so dehydrated and needed something in my system too. Getting to the aid stations and just fueling up on Gatorade and waters like it was no tomorrow. I was in such a world of hurt and so disorientated that I completely lost track of my fueling strategy too. So would highly recommend to stick to your nutrition that you're going to be using as well as the aid stations out there. Pro tip, also check out what's going to be offered at the aid stations in the marathon you're training for too. It's a good opportunity to test out these products in your long runs to see if they'll be good for your stomach. And then you get to that point where you've crossed the line and you've finished your first marathon. These are a few things that I wish I knew just a little bit more about before embarking on my journey. The first is the post-marathon blues, and I know this is mentioned quite often too, but it is a real thing, and I started to go through it actually after returning home from New York. I was lucky enough to train with a squad of people throughout the year and have them almost as accountability throughout the year to ensure I was getting out and ticking my sessions off. But once it all fell apart and we all went our own separate ways, I kind of lost touch with what I was actually doing with my life. Obviously, dedicating the last 6 months to it and going to complete nothing was something I hadn't experienced before too and didn't know how to quite process that. So self-care is of particular importance after completing a marathon. Surround yourself with friends and family, catch up on any hobbies you may have missed out on during the year after training all those hours for a marathon, and just do stuff that makes you happy as well. What I found for me was to set up some goals after the marathon to deal with my post-marathon blues too, and yes, as you would have guessed, I've managed to sign myself up for another 2 marathons this year. Second is the importance of a recovery plan. I received a recovery plan just after my marathon, but I kind of wish I got it a little bit earlier to know what exactly would go into it, because I feel like the recovery part, especially after your first marathon, is almost of more importance even. This is because it allows your body to take a much needed break and to almost reset itself to normal levels, to get rid of all the stress and the hormones that it would have been pumping out to keep your body functioning throughout the marathon, and even accepting the fact that you might need 1 week or even upwards of a month to really recover from the marathon. For me, I found I needed 2 full weeks off completely before even getting out just for a light jog too, and really didn't start picking up or including any speed workouts back into my training until about 6 or 7 weeks later. Everyone's body is different, so pay particular attention to yours. Even better is to have an idea of what your recovery plan will look like after your marathon too, so you have something to kind of work towards. Obviously, you don't need to tick off all of these sessions, it's just an idea of what recovery can look like for you and to still have that structure, I feel like, after you've completed your marathon. Reflecting on your marathon is also important. Personally, I had a not so fun post-marathon experience due to being dehydrated and needing medical attention, but it kind of sapped away such positive feelings of seeing everyone crossing the finishing line, the atmosphere of the crowds, the sights, the scenes, everything going on in the marathon village or the post-marathon village, if you want to call it that. And I kind of got to miss out on that and only really started reflecting on my marathon journey a good month or so afterwards too. Personally, I wasn't happy with my marathon time. Felt like I almost let the squad down and the foundation down, that I didn't do as best of a job as what I thought I would, but allowing myself to have time to process what actually happened, to know that I completed my first marathon. Yes, I didn't run the entire way, but just realizing that I actually did it. I set out to complete a marathon and I did, and that was arguably the biggest achievement of my year in 2023. Give yourself the praise that you deserve for completing that marathon and the opportunity to reflect. I know I had a lot of fun doing an entire New York City marathon journey kind of video, and that allowed me to invest my energy and my reflections in a positive way to look at all the beautiful memories that I had with the squad and the foundation to get to the point of the New York Marathon. So there we have it. These are some of the things that I wish I knew before running my first marathon. What are some things you wish you knew or are wanting to know before running your first marathon? Let me know down in the comments below and we'll continue the conversation there. If you're wanting to watch some more of my content, I'll leave these 2 videos up here on the screen now. I'll let you choose which one you want to watch. I'm Jack, and I'll see you next time. Catch up.